right. Well, another draft in the books, Reggie, and for better or worse, fair or unfair, the Vikings' first-time general manager will always be tied to his first draft haul as its fans' first glimpse at his draft tendencies. We're looking for his philosophies as well as the kind of, players and athletes he and his scouting staff are going to like to target in the future. So they also learned, fans that is, just how aggressive he is, willing to move up and down in the draft, even with division rivals, something that, has usually been an unwritten kind of no-no in the league after they swapped picks not once, but twice, moving back with the Lions in round 1. They selected Alabama wideout Jameson Williams and allowing the Packers access to seemingly do the same when they moved up to select NDSU wide receiver Christian Watson. Reggie, let's start there because that's kind of what fans have been having the most trouble swallowing, I think, is the risk involved trading inside the division because now you got to play these guys, right? And if they hit on those picks, it's just going to feel like a double whammy having to defend those guys twice a year for maybe, who knows, the next 5-10 years. What'd you think about those moves?
So, funny enough, I asked Kwesi about those moves. I'm like, dude, you don't think that there's a little bit of apprehension doing that? And he was just like, no, I definitely had to pause and, I thought about it. But I think in the end, the gain that he felt like in value that he got was far greater than the whole like, oh, I'm trading within the division type deal, because he was confident in the fact that the Vikings still have to line up and play those teams, and they have to try to defend what they're going to do. I think where he sees it as a position of strength and as a position of almost power, if you will, because he's just like, look, I know it's kind of taboo to trade within the division, and I know the guys that they got, but they got to find a way to beat us at the end of the day. And I guess when you take an approach like that, you're like, oh, okay, all right, like this guy has a couple stones, to say things like that and to feel the way that he feels. And so I think you mentioned it, aggressiveness. I think this really shows how aggressive he is and just how much he likes to deal. I think we saw he made like 5 or 6 trades in this draft.
I couldn't keep up.
It's kind of crazy. But he likes to make a deal. He was watching Wayne Brady and them on CBS. Like he's like, let's make a deal. And so I think that's something that, as a fan, you're like, okay, who is this guy? What is he about? And up until this point, it's just like, oh man, it seems like he's been content just to run it back. And in his mind, he's like, no, like I'm trying to build this team. I'm trying to be competitive here. And so he did the moves that he thought was in the best interest of the football team. And he got guys that he felt like were of the highest interest to them. I know he was talking about like getting a Caleb Evans from Mizzou, like that being a guy that he was really in a dark room, just like, man, like if I can get this guy at the value that we see him at, like
that was his guy. Yeah,
I would be really happy about that. And he got him, and he ended up trading up a little bit to get him. And so I am interested to see, he's not a traditional football mind, but he has been in the trenches in the football world for several years now. And so I am interested to see if the research that he's done, the charts that he sets up, if that is really going to pay off in the long run, because, a guy coming over from Wall Street, making a move into the football world, you're just like, well, what does this guy know about, building personnel and all that? And I think he's a smart enough guy to understand, how a football team works. And he's put the time in and put the work in with some elite football minds. And so now this is his first time to be able to show and prove what he can do. And I'm interested to see how these picks pay off.
I think a lot of fans were worried about the lack of experience, like you said. The Wall Street guy, Mr. Hashtag Analytics, Mr. Harvard coming over. What does he know about football? But I look at his track record in Cleveland. He was part of a couple great draft classes in Cleveland.
Oh, yeah.
And then before that, in San Francisco under John Lynch, man, they put together some great draft classes too. So he was able to see what and how that unfolded, those solid draft classes and what that looked like, and carry that with them here to Minnesota. And the other thing about trading inside the division that, again, you asked it at TCO, the press conference with Kwesi, the other thing he mentioned to you was, who's to say that these teams aren't going to move up anyways? Even though I really like that value, I can't trade within the division. Maybe the Lions move all the way up to 13 anyways and take Jameson Williams. So
yeah,
I think that was a really smart case against why you shouldn't handcuff yourself against limiting 3 more teams that you can trade with, being, again, the Packers, Lions, and Bears. And it was definitely interesting, to say the least. Something, again, NFL hasn't seen in a long time. He did it not just once, but twice. And we don't know how these bold moves are going to shake out for at least a few years. But for now, at minimum, I do tip my hat to Kwesi for breaking some of those old molds and stereotypes around the draft and being aggressive in his own way. Again, forget about the mocks, forget about the experts, Mel Kipers, McShay. Go get your guys. I mean, you study these guys. He liked the cornerback from Missouri a whole heck of a lot. He was a little aggressive. He gave up next year's 4 to move up, but he got his guy. I mean, that's his guy. That empty feeling you're left with when you miss out and somebody gets sniped, no worse feeling, I'm sure, for a GM and scouting staff after you put all the time, the effort, the interviews, the tape grinding. I'm glad he got his guys, and there is a lot to be excited about. I mean, starting with the totally revamped secondary, bringing in 3 big pieces, including that first-round pick, Lewisine, and 2 cornerbacks, one being Andrew Booth Jr. I mentioned this to you before on Friday. If you would have told me you would have got Andrew Booth Jr. somewhere in the middle of the first round, I think a lot of fans would have been awfully excited. So both guys can fly all over the place. They're big, physically imposing players who smack you like a ton of bricks. I mean, the Vikings secondary added a lot more attitude over the weekend, and that was their most pressing need. So, even though he did a lot of wheeling and dealing to get there, ultimately, that's got to be a huge win for Kwesi. Would you agree?
I do agree, and it's funny because, like, you mentioned him being aggressive and losing next year's 4th-round pick to get up and draft a Caleb Evans. And I think what's funny about that is I am not crying over these picks if I am a Vikings fan, because everything that we saw in this draft seems to tell me that next year, that 4th-round pick that he lost out on, probably he'll gain it back.
He'll find a way.
As much as he likes to wheel and deal and make moves. And so I think what's interesting is he went after the guys, as you said, that he wanted, and he got them at the value that he wanted them at. It's so funny because, Booth kind of had these injury issues or whatever, and that caused him to fall maybe out of the first round when you kind of have a first-round grade on a guy like that. And so he even talked about it, Andrew Booth Jr. did, when it was time for him to address the media after he got drafted. And he was just like, man, look, I know what people are thinking about me, but, like, his goal is to come into the league and set it on fire. And so he seems to be motivated to do that. Funny enough, and this is a really off the beaten path comparison, but I remember back in the day, there was a guy who was thought to be injury prone in his college career, and he ended up being one of the greatest Vikings of all time, and I'm talking about Adrian Peterson. And so, like I said, these are 2 completely different case studies, obviously, but it's interesting because maybe, there have been times where there have been college players who have gotten a lot of injuries, and then they got into the league and they are a pillar of health. And so that's something that maybe you hope for when you look at Booth, because you're just like, well, maybe he got all the injuries out of the way and he's ready to go out and ball. He has the capabilities. He's one of the most talented players in this draft, regardless of position. And so it's like, look, if he can stay healthy, if he can get under the tutelage and mentorship of Patrick Peterson, watch out, because like they probably got a steal in that 2nd round. That was probably like best case scenario to be able to grab him, and they were able to do that even after trading back. And they were like, oh, okay, this board is kind of falling. Let's trade back up. And get Booth and make sure we get the guy that we really wanted. Because what you don't want is you trade back so much and then all of a sudden you lose out on the guys that you had on your board. And so Kwesi acknowledged that. and he understood that, and he went up and did what he had to do. They did get that wide receiver though, probably way later than many people thought that it was going to happen, but they got a speedster with Jalen Naylor, and so interested to see how he kind of develops. But as we've seen in the last couple of years, the Vikings love them some Big Ten receivers, don't they?
And Kevin O'Connell was just itching. I mean, that foot was pacing up and down, going, "Hey, when's it? Hey, I'm all for defense, man, but when's it my turn, man? You know, I mean, I need something here to go to bed and sleep easy at night." The dude's nickname is literally it's Speedy. So, I mean, this guy didn't, I looked it up, this guy did not drop a pass over 20 yards his entire Michigan State career.
Wow.
A really good addition just for depth, man. Again, a lot of 3, 4, 5 wide receiver looks. Going to be interesting for sure to see how it all pans out. Feels like a couple steals, though, in there for Kwesi in his first draft. Just scanning the rest of the league. I mean, the Ravens just exploded off the page for me, stealing 2 number 1 players at the positions, Kyle Hamilton at safety, Tyler Lindenbaum at center, and didn't even have to trade up to go get him. Who else in the NFL kind of caught your eye as a big winner during the weekend?
And I real quick, I want to go back to what you said about getting value at the receiver position. What we saw with the Rams is kind of similar to what we're seeing with the Vikings. Like, I think Van Jefferson was like a 3rd round pick.
Good
you know, like they are getting good value with guys that they think that can come in and play well in their system.
Yes.
And I think Kevin O'Connell is kind of taking a page out of the Rams playbook and is just like, look, we don't care when we draft a guy. I am confident in my offensive system in that we can grab a guy, get him into this system, and make him be a productive player for us. And so when you got a guy like that who's a speedster, I think Kevin O'Connell has a use for him, and we'll see how that kind of develops moving forward. But everything that we've seen from like his coaching tree shows that they can just kind of grab a guy and turn him into what they need him to be in that offense. Now, going back to the question you asked about who caught my eye, I think for me, the 2 teams that really kind of blew it out of the water, and you never have said this after a draft of either of these 2 teams, the Jets and the Lions.
Man,
they got some great picks, man.
Great
especially in that first round, dude. Like, you know, it sucks that they had to trade up with the Vikings to get Jameson Williams, but like if he recovers from that ACL injury and is the Jameson Williams that we saw at Alabama, man, watch out, man. Watch out defending that guy. St. Louis, stand up, Jameson Williams representing St. Louis. And then, getting Aiden Hutchinson, having him fall number 2. There was a lot of people saying that Jacksonville really fumbled the bag drafting Walker number 1 overall. We'll see what happens with that. They took the guy that they were comfortable with. But seeing a guy like Hutchinson just fall to the Lions' lap, like, and then seeing Sauce just fall right to the Jets, it's just kind of crazy. And then they got a running back later in the
Breece
second
Hall.
round.
Like, they got your boy Garrett Wilson.
And Garrett Wilson is
Jermaine Johnson was my guy. They got him like late first round.
Like dude, this haul is awesome. And so, getting a guy like Robert Saleh, who's a defensive mind, and him getting a couple guys on that defensive end on the back end and in the front 7 that, can kind of wreck things. Like, I am interested to see how they build this thing. If Zach Wilson can take a step forward now that he has a top flight number 1 receiver in Garrett Wilson now too, like, man, watch out, man. I'm excited to see what they do. And I've never said that about the Jets before in my life.
No, and same can be said about the Lions, too. Just feels like a different identity and energy over there with Dan Campbell. You saw the way they lost some games, but the way they battled and fought, sounds cliche, but watch the games. I mean, they're not the same old Lions that we're used to anymore. And now you get Aiden Hutchinson and Josh Paschal, 2 guys that just love the game of football. Josh Paschal was a 3-time captain at Kentucky, almost unheard of in college football. The guy just lives football. And now you add him with Aiden Hutchinson, and again, under a mentor like Dan Campbell. Man, watch out. The one thing I'll say about Jameson Williams, I know we're going way over, but Last thing about the draft, Jameson Williams, whenever I thought about Jameson Williams getting drafted, I always thought about him going to a team where he could step in as that number 2 or 3 receiver and be a luxury, take the top off the defense, like the Eagles or, another team that already was kind of set at wideout, and then you bring in this third superstar speedster that can take the top off and create mismatches. It's going to be interesting for me because I never thought about him as like a true number 1 wideout on a team. I know they got Armand St. Brown, but he's going to be the guy, and it's just going to be interesting because, again, not that it's wrong by any means. It's just a different train of thought that when I thought about Jameson Williams getting drafted, I didn't think about him again as the pillar in that wide receiver room. Certainly, again, risky moves by both teams, but man, the ceiling and the payoff could be absolutely huge. Vikings will know soon enough, one way or the other, whether Jameson Williams is going to pan out.